The mop handle hit the floor before anyone understood what was happening. 17-year-old Caden Pruitt had knocked it out of the old man's hands without breaking stride, laughing without turning around, his two friends matching the sound like an echo in the empty hallway. The janitor bent to pick it up. He was slow about it. Not because he was weak. Something in the way he moved made that quietly clear. But because he had decided, for reasons nobody in Ridgecrest High School would have guessed, that the mop handle was not worth what he was capable of. He retrieved it with one hand. He straightened. His eyes, a pale, weathered blue that had the quality of still water over deep ground, tracked the three boys down the hallway with an expression that registered nothing and understood everything. He returned to work. 6 seconds, start to finish. Nobody moved to help him. Nobody said a word. But in the parking lot, through the tall wire glass window at the end of the hall, a black and tan German shepherd sat rigidly upright in the cab of a gray pickup truck. He had been perfectly still. Now he was not. He pressed his nose against the glass, and his ears went flat, and he watched the three boys push through the exit doors with an attention that had nothing casual in it. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. If this story moves you, please subscribe and follow it until the very end. What you're about to hear is something no one at Ridgecrest High School will ever forget. We read every single comment, and we want to know how far this story travels. His name was Raymond Kowalski, and he was 53 years old, and he had been mopping the floors of Ridgecrest High School in Harlan County, Kentucky, for 11 months. He was not tall by the standard of men who looked imposing, but he was built with a kind of layered solidity that suggested he had been tested at a molecular level and had come through without apology. His hair was close-cropped silver, his face deeply lined in the way faces line when they have spent years in harsh sun and then years in the shadow of its absence. His jaw was squared and set with the faint permanent tension of a man who has trained himself not to react first and ask later. His eyes were the color of a February sky over open water, pale, still, and measuring. People who met them tended to look away first without being entirely sure why. He walked with a slight hitch in his left stride, the result of a piece of ordnance that had expressed its opinion about his knee in Ramadi in 2007 and that had been overruled by 17 months of rehabilitation and sheer refusal. He was not unfriendly by nature. He had simply learned that most conversations were shorter than they needed to be, and most of the space between words was where the truth actually lived. Raymond Kowalski had served 22 years as a Navy SEAL. He had deployed 6 times: Kandahar, Ramadi, Mosul. 2 classified operations in the Horn of Africa he had signed documents agreeing never to describe in full, and 1 final rotation in Syria that had ended when the knee failed on a night insertion, and the helicopter that extracted him also extracted 2 of his men in bags. He had received 2 Bronze Stars, a Silver Star, and a commendation he kept in a drawer, because reading it felt like visiting a grave. He had retired at the rank of Master Chief Petty Officer in 2019, and had come home to Harlan County because his mother was there, and the mountains were there, and neither asked him questions he didn't know how to answer. He took the school janitor position the following spring. He told people it was because the work was quiet. That was half true. The other half was that the school was full of children who had not yet had things taken from them that couldn't be returned, and being near that, being useful inside it, was the closest thing he'd found to peace. Ghost was the other half of that piece. He was a 6-year-old German shepherd, 82 pounds, with a coat that ran from rich cream at the throat to deep iron black along the saddle and ears, amber and mahogany in between, shifting in different light. His right rear leg bore a scar where a bullet had opened the muscle during a compound clearance in Kandahar. It had healed, but left a slight outward cant at the hip that his handlers called his tell. He moved with the reserved, fluid deliberation of a dog that had learned to distinguish noise from information and had stopped wasting energy on the former. His amber eyes took in a room the way trained eyes take in rooms, systematically, with no gaps. He had been deployed 3 times with SEAL Team 7 before the Kandahar injury ended his service. Raymond had spent 8 months navigating the military adoption process, and Ghost had not left his side in 3 years. He slept at the foot of Raymond's bed with the motionlessness of a dog who had finally chosen rest over vigilance and understood, for the first time, the difference. Ridgecrest High School sat on the flat edge of a valley in southeastern Kentucky, where the mountains came down close enough on 3 sides that the afternoon light left early. It was November, and the air outside had gone to that particular cold that isn't yet winter, but has stopped pretending otherwise, sharp and damp, carrying the smell of dead leaves and wood smoke from the houses up the ridge. Inside, the floors were old linoleum in a shade of green that existed only in public institutions built between 1960 and 1975. And the hallways carried the permanent ambient sound of fluorescent lighting and ventilation systems, and the low, collective noise of 1,200 teenagers negotiating the arithmetic of social survival. Raymond had learned the building's rhythms the way he had learned every environment he'd ever worked in, by listening longer than most people were willing to, and by noticing the things that changed when something was wrong. Caden Pruitt was wrong. Raymond had understood that within the first 3 weeks of the school year, which had been enough time to observe the behavioral weather system that surrounded the boy, and to map the specific people he moved through, like pressure fronts. Caden was 17, 200 pounds, the starting center on a football team that had gone 9-2, and the only child of Gerald Pruitt, who owned the largest insurance brokerage in Harlan County and sat on the Ridgecrest High School Board of Education. He was not merely popular. He occupied the specific social altitude that comes not from being well-liked, but from being consequential, a boy whose anger had measurable effects on the lives of people around him. Teachers spoke to him with careful warmth. Assistant principals looked past the things he did in hallways. Nobody named the adjustment they made for him. They simply made it. The girl's name was Lily Morrow. She was 14, and she had a mild cerebral palsy that affected her left hand and produced a slight asymmetry in her gait that she had learned to carry with the quiet dignity of someone who had been stared at long enough to decide the staring was other people's problem. She was not timid. She was precise, methodical in her locker, careful in how she spoke to teachers, deliberate in crowded hallways. She drew in a sketchbook during free periods, detailed illustrations of birds rendered with the patience of someone who had learned patience was power. She had made the mistake, 3 weeks into the school year, of sitting at a lunch table where Caden had later decided to sit, and instead of moving, she had stayed, and that had been enough to make her a recurring reference point for his humor. By November, it had graduated from humor. Raymond was in the east hallway, servicing a floor drain when he heard the sound. It was not a loud sound. It was specific, the particular sound of laughter shaped around a target rather than a joke. He did not move fast. He moved deliberately, his knee tracking over the uneven floor with its practiced accommodation, the mop left leaning against the wall. He turned the corner and saw them, Caden and 2 of his secondary satellites, positioned around Lily's locker in the geometry of people who have chosen their location for its strategic advantages. Caden had taken Lily's sketchbook. He was holding it above her reach without apparent effort, turning pages, performing his commentary to his audience. Lily was not crying. She had both hands flat at her sides and her jaw set. and her eyes fixed on the middle distance, with an expression that Raymond recognized as the face of someone who has decided that showing nothing is the only form of control they currently have. 4 other students in the hallway watched without watching, the studied peripheral attention of people who know the cost of involvement. Raymond walked to within 6 feet of Caden Pruitt and stopped. "That belongs to someone," he said. Caden turned. The performance in his expression shifted from entertainment to contempt in the time it takes a trained eye to track the change. He looked Raymond up and down with the particular assessment of a boy who has been taught by 17 years of experience that certain people don't count. "Relax, old man," Caden said. "We're just looking." "You're done looking," Raymond said. His voice carried no elevation, no threat. The absence of both was its own kind of information. Caden smiled at his friends. He handed the sketchbook back to Lily, not returned, delivered, with the specific condescension of someone who wants it known that returning it was their choice, not a concession. He looked at Raymond once more, with the complete comfort of someone who believed he occupied territory where consequences were theoretical. "Shouldn't you be cleaning something?" he said. Raymond held the eye contact for 3 seconds. Then he nodded once, turned, and walked back to the drain. In the parking lot, Ghost had pressed himself against the truck door window and was watching the east hallway entrance with his ears fully forward and his hackles raised along his spine like a ridgeline. Principal Diane Fowler was a careful woman of 58 who had spent 26 years navigating the politics of a school district where parents of means understood their leverage. She listened to Raymond's account from behind her desk with the expression of someone absorbing information they would prefer to have received differently. She asked clarifying questions. She thanked him for reporting it. The matter would be handled through proper channels, she said. Raymond asked what that meant. She explained the progressive discipline process. He said he understood and left. He already knew what the proper channels would produce. 3 days later, he found out. Caden received a written warning placed in a file that Gerald Pruitt's attorney had already requested the expungement procedure for. This information came not from Fowler, but from Sandra Trott, 9th grade English, 19 years at Ridgecrest, who had watched 3 formal complaints about Caden dissolve in the 2 years since Gerald joined the board. She said it in the hallway near the supply closet at 7:15 with her coffee in both hands and her voice below the level of the fluorescence. She looked at Raymond when she was done with the expression of someone who had lit a flare and was hoping someone was watching the sky. "You've tried before," Raymond said. "Twice," she said. "One of those kids transferred out." He thanked her. He went back to the supply closet. He had been here before, not in a school in Kentucky, but in the general territory of a system that had decided certain people didn't count, and had arranged itself to maintain that decision. He knew what you did in that territory. You didn't move through the front door. You found the pressure points the system had forgotten to protect because it believed it was invulnerable. That afternoon, he called a number in Virginia he had not dialed in 2 years. The man who answered was named Reyes, 12 years as an investigative journalist, a prior decade he also didn't discuss in full, and a standing interest in stories about institutional failure in secondary education. Raymond gave him Gerald Pruitt's name, his board position, and the school district's vendor contract list, which was public record. Reyes asked how Raymond knew to look at the vendor list. Raymond said he'd been a janitor for 11 months. He also called a former teammate in Lexington who now practiced education law. And he drove to the county library and filed a formal complaint with the Kentucky Department of Education's online portal. His own name, the full account, the specific regulation governing board member conflicts of interest in student disciplinary matters. Ghost met him at the truck in the dark parking lot, with the calm attention of a dog who takes the return of his person as the completion of a circuit. Raymond put one hand along the dog's neck and held it there, and Ghost pressed into the contact without urgency, and they stood in the cold until the circuit felt complete. Caden found Lily in the library 2 weeks later during a free period, in the back corner with her sketchbook. He was alone. This was, Raymond would later understand, the tell, that he chose the moment when his performance had no audience, which meant the performance had become something else. He sat across from her without asking. He told her in a voice below library volume that her complaint to the art teacher about the sketchbook had been noted, and that things that got noted had a way of getting complicated, and that complicated was a word she should think about carefully going forward. He was specific in the way people are specific when they want the words not to constitute a threat while leaving no ambiguity about the threat's existence. Then he stood up and left. Lily did not report it. She told the art teacher her sketchbook had been misplaced. She stopped carrying it to school. Raymond learned this from Sandra Trott, who had been in the next aisle of the library and heard everything and written it down verbatim on a notepad page she kept in her classroom drawer. She handed it to Raymond at 7:15 the next morning. Her hands were not shaking. She had made a decision somewhere between November and now about which side of this she was standing on. Raymond photographed the page and sent it to Reyes, to the education lawyer, to the state complaint portal, and to Deputy Carl Emmons, a school resource officer who reported to the county sheriff's department and not to the school board, and who had his own complicated history with the Pruitt family that ran in the other direction from accommodation. He did not tell anyone he had done any of this. He went back to work. It was a Thursday in December, a week before winter break, when Ghost refused the command. Raymond had begun bringing Ghost inside on Thursdays, with Fowler's approval. The dog had a therapy animal certification from his post-service placement period, and 3 students with anxiety disorders had begun requesting the Thursday visits with a consistency that had made the arrangement formally documented. Ghost moved through the school on those days with the comfortable authority of someone who had earned his access and knew it, checking in with his regulars, accepting attention with patient dignity, and occasionally sitting beside someone Raymond hadn't directed him to, which Raymond had learned to treat as information rather than coincidence. On this Thursday, they were in the east hallway at 2:40 in the afternoon when Ghost stopped. He did not slow down. He stopped, mid-step, front paw lifted, and his head came up, and his ears went fully forward, and his body went to the particular stillness that Raymond had learned to read across 6 years and 3 deployments as the zero noise before a decision. Raymond stopped with him. He looked where Ghost was looking. Lily was at her locker. Caden was beside her. Not in front of her, not performing. Beside her, close, speaking in a low register that Raymond couldn't hear from this distance. Whatever he was saying it with one hand resting on the locker door above her shoulder, and Lily's body had gone to the posture Raymond recognized now as her specific form of stillness, controlled, internalized, not panicked, but costing her something to maintain. Ghost did not growl. He stepped forward, not toward Caden. Between Raymond and the scene, pulling the leash taut and holding it there, his body perpendicular to Raymond's path, his eyes on Caden Pruitt with the quality of attention that requires no interpretation. Raymond said, quietly, Ghost the dog held the position. His hackles rose along his spine in a slow, clear line. He did not move. Raymond had worked with this dog for 3 years in conditions that tested the trust between handler and animal at a level that most people never experienced and couldn't accurately imagine. He had never seen Ghost refuse. He had seen Ghost pause, hesitate, question, and he had learned that every one of those hesitations was information he should take seriously. This was not a hesitation. This was a statement. Okay, Raymond said, equally quiet. I see it. He walked forward. Ghost moved with him. Caden saw them when they were 10 feet away. He straightened. His expression went through 3 things in rapid succession: surprise, calculation, and the landing on contempt that was his default when caught in a moment he hadn't arranged. "We're just talking," he said. Raymond looked at Lily. "You okay?" Lily opened her mouth. Then she looked at Caden. Then she looked at Ghost, who had sat down between her and Caden with his body against her leg and his eyes fixed on the boy with an unblinking patience that communicated something the boy clearly felt, because he took half a step backward without appearing to decide to. "I'm okay," Lily said. And then, quietly, almost to herself, he was doing it again. Caden said, "That's not." "I know," Raymond said. He was not speaking to Caden. He was still speaking to Lily. His voice had not changed in register or temperature. "I know. It's the last time." He looked at Caden then. Caden met the look with the practiced steadiness of a boy who believed he was untouchable, and who had been confirmed in that belief often enough to trust it completely. He looked at the janitor, the mop handle, the worn green uniform, the slight hitch in the left knee, and performed the calculation he had performed in this hallway before. "You should be careful," Caden said. "My dad is on the—" "I know what your father is," Raymond said. The sentence was final in the way certain sentences are final when they come from somewhere below the level of performance. "I know what the board is. I know what the vendor contracts are. I know what the complaint files say, and what the response timeline looks like, and which regulation your father violated when he accessed Lily's disciplinary record last September." He paused. "I also know what Reyes is going to publish in the Herald-Leader on Monday." Caden's expression held for 2 more seconds, then something behind it shifted. The way weight shifts in a structure when a load-bearing element changes state. And the expression that replaced it was younger and less certain, and looked, briefly, like the face of a boy who had not yet learned how to be in a situation where his father couldn't reach. Ghost had not moved. He was still sitting against Lily's leg, his amber eyes steady on Caden Pruitt, his tail perfectly still. Deputy Emmons came through the East Wing doors at 3:05 with a woman from the county attorney's office. Fowler met them at the hallway intersection with an expression of controlled alarm. Gerald Pruitt arrived at 3:27, parking in the fire lane, and walked through the front entrance with his attorney. By 3:40, they were all in the conference room adjacent to Fowler's office. Raymond was in the hallway outside with his back against the wall, and Ghost sitting between his feet, and the muffled sound of multiple simultaneous conversations coming through the closed door. The education lawyer from Lexington arrived at 4:15. At 4:52, Gerald Pruitt came out without his attorney, which Raymond registered, and walked down the central hall toward the exit. He stopped when he saw Raymond. He stood with his coat in his hand and his expression stripped of the layer it usually wore, looking at Raymond with something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite recognition, and fell in the territory where men land when they've walked into a situation they were certain they controlled, and have discovered the map was wrong. "Who are you?" Gerald Pruitt said. Raymond looked at him the way he had looked at difficult things. Not away, not through, just at. "I mop floors," Raymond said. Gerald Pruitt left. The Kentucky Department of Education's formal finding came 6 weeks later. Gerald Pruitt had violated 3 provisions of the state's education governance statute. He resigned from the board on a Tuesday in late January, 12 minutes before the vote. The Herald-Leader story ran the following Thursday. The vendor contracts between the Ridgecrest District and Pruitt Insurance were reviewed by the state auditor's office, resulting in the recovery of $31,000 in improperly processed billings. Caden Pruitt was suspended for 10 days following a formal investigation that, without his father's structural influence, proceeded according to its written procedures. He returned in February quieter than he had left, which was not justice exactly, but was something adjacent to consequence, which was what had been missing. Fowler stopped Raymond in the central hallway the week after the story ran. She stood in the green fluorescent light with her hands folded. "I should have done more," she said. He thought about that. "You should have," he said. "But you're doing it now." She started over, new procedures, a formal reporting structure, a parent conflict of interest policy. She asked Raymond to sit on the implementation committee. He said he would need Thursdays free for Ghost's visits. Lily came to find him in the supply closet in March with her sketchbook under her arm. She'd started an art club, 3 members, Tuesdays in the library. She showed him a page, a drawing of Ghost, rendered with the patience she brought to her birds. The scar at his hip, the cant of his head, the quality of attention in his amber eyes that she had somehow caught in graphite with a fidelity Raymond looked at for a long time without speaking. "Can I keep this?" he said. "I made it for you," she said. Ghost put his chin on her knee and stayed there. 7 months after the November afternoon with the mop handle, Raymond Kowalski sat on the back steps of the small house off Route 421 in the early April light, warm and tentative, carrying the smell of thawed ground and the creek running full behind the tree line. His knee ached in the good way, the way that meant he had used himself and not simply endured. Ghost was at the edge of the yard, chasing something through the tall grass with a focused, joyful intensity that bore no resemblance to the stillness of his working hours, bolting and cutting and doubling back with his tongue out. The absolute unself-consciousness of a dog that has been given permission to simply be glad. Raymond watched him and drank his coffee and did not try to name what he was feeling. On the wall inside, he had taped Lily's drawing of Ghost at the height where he saw it first thing in the morning. The scar at the hip, the amber eyes, the quality of a dog who had been somewhere hard and come back and chosen, every day after, what to carry and what to put down. Sometimes miracles don't arrive as thunder or as declarations. Sometimes they walk quietly into a fluorescent-lit hallway, wearing a worn green uniform, carrying a mop handle and 22 years of things nobody knows to look for. God does not always send his workers through the doors we expect, in the forms we recognize, at the ranks we're prepared to salute. Sometimes he sends them ahead of their years, into the small daily places, the school hallways, the cold parking lots, the conference rooms with their closed doors, to stand between the powerful and the overlooked with nothing but patience, and a dog who knows before anyone else has figured it out that something here is wrong. There is a girl in eastern Kentucky who draws birds with the patience of someone who has decided that patience is power, and who carries her sketchbook to school again. She learned it from a janitor with pale blue eyes and a quiet dog with a scar at his hip. She learned it from watching someone choose, on an ordinary Thursday afternoon, not to keep walking. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder that courage still lives in quiet places. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from, and if you've ever walked past someone who needed more than you gave them, and if it stayed with you. We'd like to hear that too. Your story may be the one that changes how someone else moves through their day. If you believe in stories of service, loyalty, and the kind of bravery that never announces itself, please subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next one. May God bless you, protect your family, and keep you watchful for the ones around you who are carrying more than they're showing.